scripture before the message this morning will be taken from the 9th chapter of John, verses 1 through 4. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming, when no one can work.
Well, good morning. It's good to see so many of you back with us. I know the weather was kind of iffy last week, and our numbers were a little bit low because of the fear of winter still having its grasp. I know we're in the month of March, and I hope that we will continue to warm up. And now that we've sprung forward, and many of you remember to set your clocks, and I was glad to see that too. I know that losing an hour's sleep has never been fondly in my mind. In fact, me and the alarm clock had a little discussion about that this morning. I do know that we'll fall back at some point, and I'll gain that hour, but I didn't like losing it this morning. For many of you that came yesterday for our senior appreciation for 60 and up, we're so glad that some of you were able to be a part of that, and welcome you next time. This was our 5th year of providing this, where the youth was able to put this on for some of you, and we appreciate your attendance with that, and appreciate so many of the great comments that you have given us about that event. Also, we are updating our picture board, and Charles and Jeannie have taken on that task and have already updated and taken some photos. So if you have not had your photo taken and would like to see them anytime after services, they'd like to get a picture of you so we can put that up there. Or I know it's generational because I can look back at mine and see some changes in our family. And if you say at the point you'd like to have that changed, you can do that as well. As Brian mentioned, welcoming our visitors, we are so glad that you have come our way, and we always invite you to remain after services, just a brief moment, so we can at least introduce ourselves to you. Talked about this a little bit in class, about how we can miss so much of God working in our lives, in our community, even here in this congregation. But how is it that no matter the generation, from any biblical era that you seem to pick, from Old Testament to New, from those freed from slavery in Egypt and were made to wander in the desert, to even those followers and non-followers of Jesus, with all of what they had to witness, which we don't have the luxury of having. I'm talking about the performed miracles that God did for the Israelite nation to free them. And then even when Jesus performing his own miracles, which we've been studying in our class this morning, to even our generation today, because there are some people who see God working while others see nothing. It's amazing that when you look at what we just studied in class this morning, the miracles of Jesus, that there was still a group of people, individuals, critical thinkers, observers that were in the audience that did not see any of God's work. And why is that? Well, especially when some of them were so self-evident that couldn't be denied. Well, the quick answer is because of the heart. We talked a little bit about that today. It's always going to be a heart problem. And today I want you and for me to find out, which category do I fall in? It'll be one of the two. If you want to open your Bibles to John chapter 9, and that's where we were starting our reference point this morning, Shane read for us, starting in verse 1. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. I'm not just talking about someone that has been blind or become blind, and there's a reference that we're going to talk a little bit about, the significance of this miracle of being blind from birth. And his disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. The first thing I think that we need to try to avoid when we have trouble seeing God work is actually found in verse 1. having a narrow view. And unfortunately, this came from a group that is starting to learn more, starting to know better. It's the disciples. The disciples missed something. You see, they had already come to their solid answer in their own minds, that because this man was blind since birth, all they wanted was a confirmation. It didn't say, how has this man become blind, or why was he blind? They already knew in their minds it was one of the two answers they had given. They wanted Jesus to just give them confirmation of which one it was. Who sinned? This man or his parents, that he would be born blind. And that's interesting because the statement was noted to when his blindness took place. It wasn't from some accident that could be explained. Well, as a small child, this happened and then he lost his sight, or some other kind of determination. He was born blind. And maybe where some of this belief of there actually came from, actually comes from the Pharisees who taught that really the soul is eternal, that there's no meaning after they die before. They believe that we existed before and was a soul before conception. I didn't realize that was their belief. So they knew that somewhere along the lines, a sin had to procure itself to be able to dish out this kind of punishment. I think a lot of things were said the same thing with Lot, not Lot, but I mean of Job. They actually wanted to know what Job was up to. He had to confess something because of the calamity that he was in. So maybe there was a sin that took place maybe at conception or maybe before that with his parents. And that was where their belief system came from. And Jesus must have shocked their conclusions by answering in verse 3 that it was neither. So why then, they asked, so that the works of God might be displayed in him. That's the why. Jesus focused less on the past and more on the future, which we kind of tend to need to do with ourselves as well. As you see this illustration, they're just walking by, and as he's standing there by the way, all they wanted to do is talk about him, in front of him. And this won't be the last for this individual as well. It's almost as if he wasn't there, that he didn't matter. So just a side comment that, I mean, the man that's been born blind is right there underneath their feet. That reminded me of a scene of the movie in Patch Adams, if you ever seen it. Shows the disheart of how we can factual thing. And this is actually a picture of the scene that was taken, that a woman was diabetic and she had severe problems with her leg, and it was an infection, and all the doctors and these would-be doctors were standing around diagnosing the problem, what it was, what was going to be the prescription method. And he said at one point even possibly amputation, and the woman was creeping up her if you remember, she's laying on the gurney to just kind of hide herself from all of this. They're talking about her in front of her, and like she was not even there. And then Robin Williams' character asked any other questions, what is her name? And the doctor had to look and so, well, it's Marjorie. I mean, he didn't even know she was just there, not being there. And this is what the disciples were kind of doing. Jesus will get to the point by pointing out to them, by showing them that even though they wanted to debate about the guy in front of the guy, Jesus wanted to help. And they say, well, what can we do to help this man, Jesus? No, it's a topical debate about why this man was in the situation he was in. Do we do that with others? Instead of offering a helping hand, they wanted to argue about the man in the situation, and Jesus wanted to minister to him. Now, we'll see another crowd example outside of the disciples that will do the very same thing here in a minute. Maybe we start to see God when we can maybe just shut our mouths and roll up our sleeves and start to see God working. Nothing has been more self-evident than when I took over this position of all what I would see and start to see when I was more involved. And you say that about teaching a class. You know how much more you learn by studying for a class. You say, boy, that's really, I benefited greatly from it, from having to study it. I rolled up my sleeves. I got involved in it. I could see more. I see more that's going on. Stuff that I never paid attention to before is just sitting in a pew like you are doing right now. You say, well, now you're forced to that, or that's because it's your job or it's your responsibility. I see a far greater blessing. You will be able to say and do the same thing and start to understand more and take a big notice to more to God working here, even if others don't see it. I can give you numerous examples of individuals that I've seen have tremendous growth over the years in this congregation. And that's the way it should be in all of us. And we can either catch it and care and be involved, or we can be more self-involved. And that's why we miss it. That's why we don't see God working. Well, there's nothing going on there. I don't see God's evidence of any workings going on in that congregation. No wonder God wants us plugged in somewhere instead of us worshiping in our closets where most of our prayers are found. Because people on the sidelines don't see it the same way who are involved in action. Where do you hear this all the time? It's from athletes. They say this all the time. You don't know what it's like to do whatever. You can take an Olympian, you can take a basketball player, you can take a football player. Have all these people on the sidelines like us who like to coach from our couches or be that armchair quarterback, as they would say, but we really don't know the insights of what's going on from the sidelines unless we've been a participant, unless we've been involved. If we can stop seeing people's issues and make that the issue and start a debate, but instead of them seeing as a person to help, we're going to struggle like they did. You especially see that in personal families. Someone will say, well, I have a sister, and she is just so selfish and so stubborn. We're talking about issues, not the individual, not how we can help. We're talking about them and their problem, and this is why their problem exists. We're great debaters. We're great conversationalists with this, and she'll never listen. Instead of looking like that through a narrow viewpoint and maybe a little understanding, remember the old adage, well, maybe you need to know someone's pain until you've walked a little bit in their shoes. Then you get your eyes opened a little bit of what's going on, because maybe there's more to it than her selfishness and stubbornness. Maybe it's that she's hurt. Maybe that she has some doubts, or maybe she has some questions and she'd love to ask but is afraid to ask because of the type of response that they're used to getting from us. We far too often do that in the church today. And if we are a disciple of His, we got to go to work. We got to be involved in people's lives, and that's what Jesus is showing us here. You and I are in the next verse. I want us to see it here in verse 4. We always put this on an I. That's your job, Eric. That's the elder's job. That's someone else's job. We must work the works of Him who sent me as long as it is day, and night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. See, we get the same extended invitation with our mission, with the Great Commission. Don't leave this charge to just these men standing around talking to Jesus either, that they are the we. We are also called His disciples, are we not? Are we not also called His followers? And it's not just for them to go. It wasn't just for them to roll up their sleeves to get involved. See, while Jesus was there, they did a lot of listening. And as we see in the New Testament letters, they did a lot of doing. And that's why James gets to the point, it says, don't be just hearers only. I wonder why, because a lot of them were stuck on hearing Jesus' word at Jesus' feet, right at Jesus' side. What He was saying, what is He going to say next? And where did Jesus take them? Just to the synagogues and sit over on some pews and just talk about scriptural and biblical things, about all of the things that they should be doing? No, He went. He was here. He was there. He was everywhere. And He went. And He took them with Him. So let's not leave that for them. It's now us to work. He says that we must work the works of Him, that's God, for how long? When do I stop? It says day and night comes, and there will be a time when there is no more work. Let me ask you this. Have you stopped working? Has the world stopped working? I don't think we can answer yes to that. We indeed know that it is still involved for us to work. We work until then. That part has not been fulfilled yet. The longer you know the Lord, the more we should be like him. So when we first start, we're eager to grow and grow in him and tell everyone about our conversion. And then as time passes, it may taper off. It may level off. Unfortunately, it may fall off, but we should all be about discipleship. The charge of go and make disciples. As you heard me say this before, as we've got caught up in this world of making converts, that's not what the Lord wanted to make. See, converts is just addition, and I'm not going to go back into my old lesson that I gave you on that, but we as churches as a whole, even America, and we're not getting it like China and others that are growing rapidly in Christianity because they're discipling. That's getting someone to get them to go and do the same, to make the same. We stop in converts because we want to add to our numbers. We don't want to multiply, we want to add. We're always putting numbers up because we want to add to our numbers. Adding is not the multiplication table of what Jesus wants with multiplication about discipleship, and that's really where the word comes from. To make one that turns around and makes another, and you can see how it can multiply and quick. We've read this and seen this in families. A brother comes back and converts brother and sister and aunt and uncle and grandma and grandpa, and away it explodes. That's the way it should work. But it's only when we take what we have read and we go out and do it, not just to be hearers only. And I'm sure there was a time before Christ ascended, all the disciples wanted to do was be good hearers. In fact, so I'm not even doing you any good. I'm going to have to leave, and when I do, I'm going to send you back the Comforter. And when he comes back, I'm going to give you total recollection. All these things that you're worried about, about remembering, we all would like total recall. They're going to remember that. Everything that was said to them and spoken to them, Jesus spoke, and they listened. But as he went out, he showed them that he wanted them to be involved in people's lives. And after he ascended them, we see them doing the exact same thing. Not at first. They had to get recharged. A lot of them went back to fishing, went back to the old job. He's gone. I guess mission accomplished. It's over. But unless we roll up our sleeves and start to invest in others, it seems all they wanted to do was stand around and debate, to discuss, to talk about this guy's situation. And again, is that what we get stuck in so many times? More often not than the working part. But the debate part, we're great at that. I'm sad to say many of my years of myself were spent doing just that. It's okay, I'm in good company. They got forgiveness. They saw it. They turned from that and became hard workers for the Lord until death. And they did this, like I said before, in front of the guy no less. And Jesus wanted to help. And he was going to show them and the man, even though a lot of times we want God to intervene and send someone else to help. And we want someone else to be involved in our lives. Have you said that? Could you send someone my way to help me out in this situation? But who are we possibly for someone else? To do the same for someone else? To be that answered prayer? Where are we in the equation? Because when we roll up our sleeves and get involved, our involvement starts to open our eyes to what God is doing. And nothing will amplify that more than getting involved. So as the Nike slogan says, just do it. So do it. Don't stand around talking about how good it will be if we start this or do this. Let's just get it started. Verse 6, when he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of spittle and applied the clay to his eyes and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. Let's notice something else different that Jesus uses to teach. How many believe that Jesus just could have spoken and he would have healed? We talked a little bit about this in class, about There wasn't anything said about the man being lowered down, the paralytic with the 4 men that put him up on the rooftop. They didn't say a word. Jesus did all the talking. I believe that if Jesus was just to say, you're healed from your blindness, it would have been the extent of it. He's all authority. He's God incarnate. Receive your sight. Go. Sure, he could, but he could have also used this example to show the disciples something else that is found here in the text. A picture of ministry. And you know, it's an unrequest. You talk about he got dirt and he spit in it and he made mud. And mud pies are only good for what? 5 and 6-year-olds, you know, when we used to play in the mud, then we would get dirty. I don't want to get dirty. Go and wash in this river. Oh, I don't want to wash in that river. That river is filthy. That's dirt. Tell me something more I want to hear. I mean, this is illustrated time and time again because sometimes we see when we get involved, our hands get dirty. It can be a dirty business. Something that it's hard. It may not what I want it to be or expect. It could get messy. It could, dare I say, get uncomfortable. And Jesus also asked for this man to do something. He was told to go wash in the pool, and he went, washed, and as the text says here, came back seeing. Now, watch this sad commentary starting in verse 8. Therefore, the neighbors, love that. Therefore, the neighbors, are we neighbors? And those who previously saw him as a beggar were saying, is not this the man who used to sit and beg? And others were saying, well, this he is. Still others were saying, no, but it's like him. He kept saying, I am the one. Here again, being talked about while standing right there. Well, it kind of looks like that guy. I think it could be the guy. I don't think it's the guy. Well, maybe it is. Yeah, it's the guy. And that's what all of them were saying. Verse 10. So they were saying to him, how then were your eyes opened? He answered, the man who's called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Sharum and wash. So I went away and washed, and I received sight. And they said to him, where is he? He says, I don't know. The next thing I want us to see that prevents us to see God working is something that is hard for all of us to do, considering the passage about how hard it is to tame the tongue, as it says in the book of James, is close your mouth. It's simple talk. Verse 8, notice he says the neighbors. Do you remember the old Bewitched show, Mrs. Kravitz? She was the nosy neighbor. Always had the curtain drawn back to see what was going on at the house. And she was quickly to the door if there was something amiss. It's Mrs. Kravitz. Are we the Miss Kravitz of the world? They kept arguing again in front of this man. I love how he says, hey, I am the guy. No need to try to reassure yourselves, I'm it. They were doing just like what the disciples were earlier. Notice what they didn't see or even want to recognize, a man blind from birth, able to see. Let me ask you this, big miracle or small miracle? It'd be a tremendous miracle for someone that has never seen sight. Very big miracle, I would say, and all should be thankful and rejoicing. But instead, all they could focus on is the ramblings on and on about it. I wonder Jesus had to shake his head a couple of times at mankind, and even a tear come up. How long must I be with you? How long? See, we can lose the sight of what's going on because some of us, as our ceaseless end of talking and debating, rambling about what God is doing or not doing. So they say to him, so how is it that you're able to see? And not what a great miracle. Tell me about this. Tell me about this man, Jesus. How do you feel? You must be ecstatic. Find out, what are colors to you now? This man, Jesus, healed me. And all they could come up with, oh yeah, where is he? I'm sure if I was the man, this is what I would want to say. Listen, I've only had a sight for a few minutes. I'm just trying to take in some things here. I'm noticing things I've never even noticed. I've maybe felt before and wondered what they look like. I'm taking that in. I don't know where he is. How silly, really. We just keep running our mouths and don't see God working through our own words. You want to see the sad truth in mankind throughout the ages? These examples show how we don't see God working with words that work against us. And there are several that we tend to use. It can be skeptical words. That's never going to happen. Oh, we used to do that long ago. That will never work. Can't do that. Is what we are not seeing because of what we are saying and how we use our words. We don't choose them wisely a lot of times. How about not skeptical words, but critical words? Those barb a little bit more. That's when we doubt people. They can't do that. I've seen them in action before. This will just be a failure. Saying things like, they will never, she won't, they won't, he will never. Being so negative and critical. Just think about those in the desert when our critical words go up, your perception of God and at work goes down. They couldn't see it. I don't care how much manna was stacked up. I don't care how much quail was sent. Don't see God working. All we're out here is to die. Then there is cynical words. That's doubting the intention. That's getting into the heart of the matter, saying, well, I know why she does that. Or I know why he did that. Oh, really? We talked about that in our class today. Only God knows the intent of the heart. We're not very good at that. We think we are. Oh, I know why she did that. Complaining words. These are why so many wandered in the desert so long that can't continue. And this needs fixing right now. Murmurs. And there are consuming words. Those who go around starting little fires to start things up. Constant warnings in the New Testament about those. And that comes from within. That isn't the outside world attacking the church. That's from within. From our words that can cut so deeply. Don't forget, this is a miracle, a big miracle that has just happened, and they can't see it because they're running at the mouth. Am I like that? Are you like that? Do I say those kind of things? And where has it got me? Where has it got the church? Where has it got his work? Don't we feel somewhat ashamed of ourselves sometimes? It can be very humbling when it's revealing, as the scripture does, to our own hearts. That's the saddest of all, starting in verse 13. They brought to the Pharisee the man who was formerly blind. This even gets worse. Now it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And then the Pharisees also were asking him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, he applied clay to my eyes, and I washed and I see. How many times do I need to tell these people? Already told it to the neighbors. Now I got to tell it to you. Same thing, same answer. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. He's working. But others were saying, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? And he said, he is a prophet. The Jews then did not believe it of him that he had been blind and received sight until they called the parents of the very one who received his sight. That's how bad it gets. I don't even know if you're the same blind man. Bring your parents here. Let me see. They have to say that you're the person. And question them, saying, is this your son who you say was born blind? They're even going to put doubt on the parents, see? Even if they say, well, yeah, that's my son. Well, that's what you say. We don't know if he is or not. We can't believe this. Then how does he now see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But now he sees. We do not know. Or who opened his eyes? We do not know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. He's already done that, but that's fallen on deaf ears. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. See, that's why they answered that way. They were afraid of the retaliation, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. And even though this is your son that's been blind from birth, you can't even rejoice in that, in fear of retaliation. For this reason, in verse 23, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. He then answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. So they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, I told you already. It's like, this is getting to be a broken record, people. I just want to go out and go relish in my new sight. Paraphrasing, of course, but I can only imagine the frustration. I told you already, and you, what? You did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become his disciples too, do you? Oh, I love that. Because if you're going to believe this, you're going to be a disciple, you're going to be a follower. No, we're not. They reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he is from. The man answered and said, well, here's an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. What a revelation that you should have seen. Coming from a common man that's been blind since birth. Who is really blind, I ask you? In verse 31, we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened his eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Wow. Who's the prophet now? Who's the truth revealer? They didn't believe, and he was blind. He was reversing it on them. If they could see it, and they went to all those drastic measures to convince themselves it wasn't true. It can't be. Even if the man stands here before us and says, I'm the man. No, don't believe it. Let's get your parents. Well, you say it's your son. We don't even know if it's your son or not. That's to the degree they went. Even doubted the parents when they said that he was. They said, well, you say this is your son. They clearly didn't want to believe. Even the man pointed that out to them. What's that do for us today? Well, if we look around even at this congregation and don't see God working in it, it could be that I may not be seeing some things. Not involved to see any things. I rest on the neighbor's critical thinking and saying, and I can just go about and doing that for the rest of my life. At the end of my life, never see God working at all. It's because maybe we don't want to see or believe. Because just like this group, we'll find some ways and convince ourselves of a different problem. And that's why God isn't working. Is it our heart? And we don't want to see it. And if you can see it, and you're starting to see it more, then good. That's the whole purpose. If not, I'm trying to give you some reasons of why you may not see it. And that's a question you'll have to ask yourselves. We have to open our minds a little bit to some of the seeing and then roll up our sleeves and get involved. The more we do, the more we see. The more we'll see that we'll need to do even more and see all what God is doing. I think sometimes if some of us in our attitude was to see a real bona fide miracle, would we even believe that? Because Jesus had to even go up against those that he saw. When they said, show us a sign, he says, you're not here for a sign. He could read a heart. I can't. He says, because no matter what I was to do, you'll explain it away and you'll go off in disbelief. Oh, he used magic, hocus pocus. I've seen guys disappear the Statue of Liberty, and I knew it really wasn't, and I'm not going to believe in that. I hope that's not the case with you. But I can start doing something about it today. And maybe it may be simply by first starting to close my mouth and going to work for him. I think that's what so many things about just, let's not start talking about doing it. Let's just do it. Because we're all good talkers. You've heard it, talk the talk, walk the walk. That's what people want to see. You want to see a congregation that's changed people's lives. God will give the increase. But if we're going to be critical thinkers and critical talkers and cynical believers, and then that's exactly what you're going to get. Is exactly what's found some 2,000 years ago with a man that was blind since birth and received his sight. Do you see God working in your life? Maybe you haven't, and maybe you've gone away from it for a while that you need to rekindle that, or maybe you never obeyed the gospel and would like the first start of how this all begins, by being buried with him in the watery graves of baptism and walk in newness of life. Or maybe you just need prayers of the church of something that's going on in your heart and you need to make right, get a fresh, clean start. Whatever it is, if you have a need, if you'll come now and make it known as we stand and as we sing.